Heaven Official's Blessing. Chapter 225. Audio source: WuXiaWorldAudiobook.com. Turning the world upside down. Battle the fiery demonic fortress in the sky. That fiery demonic fortress that was once the heavenly capital was shaking in the sky, snapping and cracking. Countless flaming rubble came rolling down, tumbling into the water as the body of the fortress slowly turned around. At first it was laid out flat, but now it had stood up vertically and started to divide. The many divine palaces that were sitting atop the grounds of the heavenly capital were moving their positions. And what was once a perfect fortress had actually started to break down into 7 to 8 large pieces. A heavenly official wondered, "Have we struck it down? It's falling apart. How can it be that easy?" Xie Lian said, "This is probably..." Before he finished, those broken pieces of the fortress body rapidly reconstructed themselves anew. The sound of friction between giant boulders was incessant, and on this end, as the heavenly officials watched, their eyes grew bigger and bigger. Some even had their mouths hung wide open. That fiery demonic fortress wasn't falling apart, but was rebuilt after splitting into different parts. And after reconstruction, it's become a fiery giant. That giant was roused from its deep slumber and stood tall in the air. Those shimmering golden palaces covered almost all of its body like a full body armor, sturdy and solid. It replaced the heavenly capital, and faced the Xie Lian's giant stone divine statue. However, when comparing the two sides, Xie Lian's side actually became delicately small and a little pitiful, like a child standing against an adult. This giant divine statue could be called a gigantic object, but this fiery giant could take the title of dominating both heaven and earth. It was at least bigger by 5 or 6 times, so terrifying it made one's hairs stand, looking as if with one step it could destroy one fortress beneath its feet. After the reconstruction was thoroughly complete, that fiery giant slowly turned its head, and from its mouth spouted a torrent of flames, sweeping towards those 4 bone dragons. The wall of flames cut through those 4 water guns, and when those 4 bone dragons saw things were going downhill, they each dove back into the sea. As for the giant, it landed its feet above the surface of the sea, taking it like it was land, and steadily walked towards the giant stone divine statue. Atop the head of that giant was the great martial hall, and Jun Wu was enthroned within, permeating an oppressive aura. The heavenly officials were all suffocating with the air, and cried, "Your Highness, don't just stand there, hurry and get away, we're dying here. We can't win, there's no way we can win. Wake up, Your Highness is bigger than you by 1,000,000-fold." However, Xie Lian responded, "We can't keep running away. Even if we can't win, we can't go anywhere else." The heavenly officials were first taken aback before it dawned on them. Indeed, they couldn't keep running like this. And if Hua Cheng stopped providing spiritual powers, then with just their spiritual powers, they would be exhausted to the point where the divine statue could no longer fly, and in the end they still must find somewhere to fight. And rather than luring that fiery giant somewhere where it's populated, why not just take care of things here? At least above the sea of this black water ghost lair there was not a soul, so no mortals would be dragged in. While those were considerations a heavenly official should naturally have. But against such a menacing fiery giant, just thinking about how this would be the opponent they must battle with water behind their backs, black water, no less, who wouldn't be terrified? But even then, no one wanted to be the first to yell for Xie Lian to quickly take them to somewhere where there was more people. Thus, Xie Lian said, "Everyone hang on tight, careful not to fall off. One will sink in the waters of the black water ghost lair." That fiery giant lunged at the stone divine statue that was smaller than itself by many times and reached out, looking to be grabbing for it. Xie Lian agilely dodged, leaping vigorously, and the heavenly officials holding onto the divine statue were being flung around. flipping and toppling, sometimes rising, sometimes falling, exceedingly distressing and thrilling, their screams going up and down along with the divine statue. Never mind that most of them weren't martial gods and only sat in their palaces all day. Even very few martial gods had ever experienced a battle such as this. Xie Lian heard Quan Yi Jun yell, "You don't have a weapon. You need a weapon." The heavenly officials finally couldn't hold back any longer. "Yes, Your Highness. It's hard to win if you don't have a weapon." Xie Lian yelled back, "I'm trying to think of what can be used as a weapon." Rue very excitedly twisted its body into many loops and came snuggling to his face, but Xie Lian pushed it away. "Thank you, but you won't. You're too small." Just then, Hua Cheng spoke up. "It's not like there's no weapon if you need one, but use this for now." Then, Xie Lian heard another round of shrieking howls. Those 4 bone dragons that dove into the sea to evade the throwing flames from the fiery giant poked out again, surrounding the giant stone divine statue. The heavenly officials couldn't help but be alarmed. What are they planning? Naturally, they didn't surround to attack. Xie Lian watched them as each bit onto the other's tail, and 4 long-bone dragons linked into one curiously long-bone dragon. That linked bone dragon leapt up and came flying over. Without thinking, Xie Lian raised his hand, and that giant divine statue caught it. Xie Lian muttered in wonder, "This is a bone dragon whip. Just control it as he always would, Rue, and it'd be fine." Xie Lian whipped up his hand, and that bone dragon whip whipped over, going straight for that fiery giant's head. That fiery giant also raised its hand, and caught the end of the whip. However, the bone dragon whip suddenly snapped from the middle, and the giant divine statue took a step forward. With the whip in hand, it whipped again at the giant's head. That fiery giant looked as if it took pain, loosened its grip, and that stretch of bone dragon it caught slithered back, linking once again with the rest in Xie Lian's hand. This bone dragon whip could break and reattach, exceedingly flexible. Sometimes it'd break into 2, sometimes into 4, plus that giant divine statue's moves were also extremely agile, so it suddenly became very hard to handle. The heavenly officials' hairs were all blown into complete wild messes from the flaming whirlwinds, their hems covering their faces. "I didn't think His Highness actually had a couple moves. I've only ever seen him collect junk, so he really did come from a martial god background." "You can take away the 'I didn't think' at the beginning of your sentence," head priest said. "And there's no need to put emphasis on that junk collection either." Xie Lian, that incredibly long linked bone dragon whip was like a tragically white steel chain, crackling as it tangled the opponent. That fiery demonic giant's body sank, and immediately, the heavenly officials snapped to, "Quick, quick, quick, pull it into the sea." Below the battlefield was that black water ghost lair one would sink in its waters. That giant divine statue gripped that bone dragon chain, and Xie Lian gritted his teeth as he exerted force. "Come on down." Sure enough, that fiery demonic giant sank a bit more. The heavenly officials quickly put all their hands and feet on top of the giant divine statue again to transfer spiritual powers, chanting, "Sink, sink, hurry and sink." Listening to their voices shouting, "Sink at Zhan Wu," Xie Lian felt a slight chill in his heart, and looked up to the great martial hall sitting atop that giant divine statue. For some reason, although he couldn't completely see the expression of the one sitting within, he could still somehow sense that Zhan Wu was jeering. That fiery demonic giant was pulled into the bottom of the sea as expected. But the flames on its body was still burning, and even after it entered the waters they were not extinguished, and instead, from the blackness of the deep sea, a red light was emitting. It only slowly disappeared as the bone dragons pulled it deeper and deeper. The heavenly officials all sighed in relief, but Xie Lian didn't dare to completely relax still. There wasn't any sound for a good while. Xie Lian then remembered that Pei Ming didn't answer his call, and he didn't hear the voices of Ban Yu and the others, so they were probably dragged into the sea together with the giant. This time, it really might be the worst-case scenario for them. Just then, the surface of the sea down below started rolling and bubbling. Bubble bubble, it kept spreading and started surging, and there was even waves of white smoke. The seawater was boiling. Xie Lian was just about to fly upward when suddenly, a hand broke through the waters and grabbed the ankle of the giant divine statue. Xie Lian felt its body forcefully sink. Jun Wu's laughter was echoing throughout the entire sea, filling every corner. It wasn't a wild laughter, and it wasn't jeers either. It couldn't be described, but it was even more chilling. With its dragging, half of the body of the giant divine statue was pulled into the boiling water, and the heavenly officials hanging on at the bottom had to quickly climb up. Even Xie Lian, who was standing at the very top of the giant divine statue, could feel the suffocating steam and heat, so hot that sweat rolled from his forehead and down his back. If they were to be dragged into the sea, then they were going to be cooked from top to bottom. That won't be. Other weapons couldn't release his full potential. He still needed a sword. Suddenly, he heard head priest's voice. Fluffy child, what are you doing? Don't just toss a corpse at me. Wait, what are you doing? Xie Lian was also alarmed, and while maintaining the hand seal, he shouted down below. Qi Ying. Yet he only saw a figure dash along the leg of the giant divine statue, then up along the arm of that fiery demonic giant, running straight for its head. Xie Lian shouted, Qi Ying, come back. However, Quan Yizhen heeded no one. The moment he dashed onto that fiery demonic giant's arm, he was discovered, and that giant's other hand came slapping over, like it was slapping at a mosquito resting on its arm. Incredibly fast and incredibly on target. It slapped right on. Many heavenly officials screamed in alarm, but when they looked closely, Quan Yizhen was still running. Turns out, that slap certainly was on target. But he dodged to the crevice between the 5 fingers of that giant and escaped the tragedy of becoming a lump of bloody flesh, leaping over the fingers, and continued his run. The giant continued to slap. He just barely dodged the first and second slap, but he might not be so lucky the third time. When the next slap comes, he might just be crushed into a bloody mess. However, Quan Yizhen had already reached his destination. He jumped into the skull of the bone dragon that was tangling the fiery demonic giant. The moment he jumped in, the 2 ghost fire lanterns within the bone dragon's eyes suddenly flashed, the light exploding, and even its body was emitting a thin layer of white light. It raised its head and gave a long howl, its body wrapping even tighter. Xie Lian could hear the heavy sound of boulders being crushed. Receiving such suffocation, that fiery demonic giant loosened its grip, and finally released the ankle of the giant divine statue. Once free, Xie Lian instantly flew into the air, and reached out a hand. Qi Ying, come over quick. Don't tangle with it. Quan Yizhen was riding that link bone dragon, and not only did he not let go, he even roared, using all of his strength, and urged it to wrap even tighter. Countless rubble and debris fell to the surface of the sea. And that fiery demonic giant lost its patience, pulling out of the sea completely, and from within the great martial hall, flames of war roared anew, burning across all of its body. And the bone dragon that was firmly wrapped around its body was also buried into the sea of fire along with Quan Yizhen. Qi Ying, Xie Lian cried, and leaned over, charging towards that giant, punching apart that link bone dragon chain. White joints of burning bones fell into the sea. And just as Xie Lian was about to catch the bone dragon skull where Quan Yizhen was, that giant's hand came slapping, sending that bone dragon skull flying over 3-4 miles away. With that distance and speed, the giant divine statue couldn't seize the skull in mid-air at all. And by the time it rushed over, Quan Yizhen would probably have already fallen into the sea along with the link bone dragon, and right now, the sea was practically a pot of boiling water, cooking whoever would fall in. Right at the last second, A white, giant bonefish suddenly flew out of the surface of the sea, and caught that bone dragon's head. Then, like a fish that escaped the net, it hastily swam far, far away, whipping its tail. There was fright but no actual danger. Xie Lian sighed a breath of relief, and sped over to see. After breaking away from the giant, the teeth of that bone dragon's skull was still chattering, but the flames had been put out, its mouth opening and closing like it was panting harshly. Quan Yi Jun was lying inside, completely black, somewhat roasted. Perhaps it was because it was roasted by fire. His hair appeared to be even curlier. However, because the bones of the bone dragon's skull acted as a protective shield, he wasn't burned too badly, and it should just be a flesh wound that'd heal after quiet nurturing. After all, Quan Yi Jun's life force was very tenacious. The state of those 4 bone dragons was more severe, burnt and struck, their dead bodies scattered all over the surface of the sea, some even burning still. Xie Lian glanced at them and couldn't help but feel another wave of embarrassment. We've also destroyed the bodies of the guards to Blackwater's abode. Is it really okay? Hua Cheng smiled. Don't worry. It's fine. Xie Lian wondered, just how much money does he owe you? The heavenly officials saw the tragic state of Quan Yi Jun and said, I can't believe His Highness Qi Ying, very brave to stand out in the moment of danger, saving everyone. Xie Lian recalled how Quan Yi Jun received all those cold shoulders in the upper court and shook his head, thinking, it's not that he wanted to go and save everyone. Just then, from far in the distance behind them came crackling sounds again. When they looked back, the body of that giant was completely covered by raging fires. It didn't charge to attack, but instead it flew upward into the sky, through the clouds, and vanished just like that. The heavenly officials were all dumbfounded, then were overjoyed like they survived a calamity. Has he given up on attacking us? Xie Lian, however, didn't think it was a good prospect at all. San Lang, how did he just vanish? He activated the distance-shortening array, Hua Cheng answered. Where did he go? Xie Lian questioned. Hua Cheng's eyes were solemn. The royal capital. That's where Shi Qingchen was, still guarding the human array. End chapter.